Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off our session today with an overview of Mega Goal 1.1. Today, we'll be focusing on grammar, specifically Unit 6, Take My Advice. Since this is our first slide, I just want to warmly welcome you all and give you a quick idea of what's coming up. We'll explore key grammar concepts in this unit and look at how to give and take advice effectively. So, let's get started and make this an engaging and productive session. Today, we're focusing on how to correctly form and use different types of verbs and expressions for giving advice. First, you'll want to remember to correct 2- and 3-word verbs when necessary, making sure they fit the context properly. We also use had better to give firmer advice. It's a way to strongly suggest what someone should do. On the other hand, words like should, ought to, might, and could are more for giving advice that is less forceful but still helpful. Additionally, it's important to use 2- and 3-word verbs correctly with pronoun objects, ensuring proper sentence structure. The main goal here is to understand how to form these expressions accurately and use them effectively in conversation. This will help you communicate advice clearly and confidently, which ties into the overall theme of improving your English skills for real-life situations. Today, I want to talk about how we use words like might and could. Usually, these words are used to express ideas or possibilities rather than giving direct advice. For example, saying, "You might join a gym," suggests it's an option rather than a must. On the other hand, words like should and ought to are more about giving advice or recommendations. For instance, "You ought to eat healthy food," or "You should exercise regularly," are stronger suggestions that imply it's a good idea to follow them. It's also interesting to note that ought to is generally considered stronger than should, meaning it sounds a bit more like advice you really should take. Another point is that both should and ought to are followed by the infinitive form of a verb, like eat or exercise. This makes it clear they are giving advice rather than just possibilities. Finally, understanding these modal auxiliaries helps us communicate better about suggestions and options. They are essential tools in giving advice, and knowing when to use each one can make our messages clearer and more effective. Now, let's look at how we can use ought to give advice or express an opinion. The key thing to remember is that ought to is followed by the base form of the verb, which is just the simple verb without any endings. For example, if I want to suggest that someone should study more, I would say, "You ought to study harder." And if I think they shouldn't talk so much, I would say, "You ought not to talk so much." It's a polite way to give advice or recommendations. Now, moving on to should, which is very similar in function. Should is also used to give advice or express opinions about what is right or best. For instance, if your grades are not very good, you might say, "You should study harder." And if someone is talking too much during class, a good suggestion would be, "You shouldn't talk so much during the classes." Both ought to and should are modal auxiliaries, meaning they help us express advice, suggestions, or opinions clearly. The main difference is often in tone or formality, but both are very useful for giving advice. So, when you're advising someone, think about whether should or ought to feels more natural in the context, and remember they are followed by the base form of the verb. So let's talk about some simple but effective habits for a healthier lifestyle. First, walking. It's amazing how just walking for an hour a day can boost your physical health and clear your mind. It's a great way to stay active without feeling overwhelmed. Next, watching TV. While it's relaxing, too much screen time isn't good for your mental or physical well-being. So I recommend limiting your TV time and finding other engaging activities. And finally, sleep. Getting enough rest is crucial. Try to go to bed early so your body and mind can fully recharge. My advice: incorporate these small changes into your daily routine. Walk more, watch less, and prioritize your sleep. These habits will help you feel better and stay energized throughout the day. Now let's look at how we use had better with a negative form. When giving advice and you want to strongly suggest that someone should not do something, you use had better not followed by the base form of the verb. For example, you might say, "She had better not apply for the job." Notice that we say not after had better, and we keep the verb in its base form. It's important to remember that the structure is had better not plus the base verb, not to plus the verb. For example, you wouldn't say, "She had better not to apply," which is incorrect. Some more examples include, "You had better not prepare for the exam late," or "He had better not forget his keys." These are used to strongly advise against doing something, emphasizing that it's not a good idea. Compared to should or ought to, had better is a bit stronger. It's like giving a warning or showing that there might be some negative consequences if the advice isn't followed. So remember, had better not is your go-to for giving strong advice that someone shouldn't do something. All right, let's talk about some useful expressions for giving advice and making recommendations. When we say "d better," it's actually equivalent to had better. For example, if I say, "You'd better take it," I'm suggesting that it's really important to follow that advice. Now notice the difference between affirmative and negative forms. If I say, "You'd better take it," that's an affirmative statement, meaning I think it's a good idea. But if I say, "You'd better not take it," that's a negative form, warning you that not taking it might lead to trouble. This brings us to the idea of danger or a problem if the advice isn't followed. Had better often implies that there could be some negative consequences if you ignore it. It's more urgent than just a suggestion. Next, we have questions like, "Should I take this medicine?" That's a typical way to ask for advice. And when we use should or ought to, we're saying it's just a good idea to do something, nothing too forceful, just a recommendation. Remember, the key difference with had better is the sense of warning or potential danger if you don't follow the advice. It's more serious than just suggesting something. So in summary, d better and had better are useful for giving advice that's important, especially when ignoring it could lead to problems. They're stronger than should or ought to, which are more about good ideas or suggestions. Now let's look at how we can use different word orders to change the emphasis or clarity. For example, in the sentence, "He threw it away," the word "away" is placed at the end, showing where the object is being disposed of. Alternatively, we can say, "He threw away the shirt," which puts the emphasis on the action of throwing the shirt away. It's important to remember that some verbs are two-part verbs, which means they consist of a main verb plus a particle. In this case, threw away is a separable two-word verb. That means we can move the object around within the sentence. And here's a key point. With these separable two-word verbs, we can actually replace the noun object with a pronoun. So instead of saying, "He threw away the shirt," we can say, "He threw it away," which makes the sentence more concise and natural. Understanding how these verb-particle combinations work helps us communicate more flexibly and clearly, fitting the overall goal of mastering English sentence structure. Now let's look at some useful expressions that involve the word get and other related words. First, we have get along, which means to have a good relationship with someone. For example, if I say, "He had an ability to get along with all kinds of people," I'm highlighting someone's ability to get along well with others. Next, we have get with, which is often used when talking about agreeing or harmonizing with someone or something. But in this context, we're focusing more on the idea of relationships and acceptance. Moving on, get up isn't in this slide, but it's a common phrasal verb worth mentioning. Now, the second key phrase is put up with, which means to accept a bad situation or endure something difficult. For example, "I couldn't put up with the noise any longer," means I was unable to tolerate the noise anymore. It's also important to notice that some verbs in English are three-word verbs, like put up with. They combine a verb, an adverb, and a preposition, and they often have idiomatic meanings that are different from their individual words. So, to sum up, these expressions help us describe relationships, tolerance, and acceptance, which are essential skills in both personal and professional life. Understanding these phrases will help you communicate more naturally and effectively in English. Now let's talk about how to turn off objects in English, especially when using phrasal verbs like turn off. When we say turn off, we're usually talking about switching something off, like a device or an appliance. For example, turn off the TV. That's a simple command or statement showing the action. But what's interesting is how we include objects in these sentences. Noun objects, like the TV, can go either between the verb and the particle or after the particle. So both turn off the TV and turn the TV off are correct and common. Now, when we're using pronoun objects like me, him, her, them, us, or it, they go between the verb and the particle. For example, instead of saying turn off the TV, you can say turn it off. It's important to remember that in phrasal verbs like turn off, the object placement can change depending on whether you're using a noun or a pronoun. Nouns can be placed either way, but pronouns always go between the verb and the particle. This structure helps keep sentences clear and natural. So, whether you're giving instructions or making statements, knowing where to put the object is key to sounding correct and fluent. And this concept ties into the overall theme of understanding how phrasal verbs function in everyday English. All right, now we're moving on to the idea of throwing away. When we're cleaning a room, part of the process is deciding what to keep and what to discard. Here, we plan to discard anything we don't need. This could be old papers, broken items, or anything that no longer serves a purpose. The key point is to actively identify items that are clutter and remove them from the space. Think of it as a way to create more room and make the environment more organized and efficient. This step is essential because it helps us focus on what really matters and keeps the space tidy. Remember, the goal is to clear out the unnecessary so that the room feels fresh and functional. Now let's talk about the phrase put off. Essentially, it means to delay or postpone something. Instead of saying put off, we often use a more specific 2- or 3-word verb phrase to make it clearer or more natural in conversation. For example, in a sentence like, "Can we postpone the meeting until Sunday, please?" Here, postpone is a perfect substitute for put off. This is useful because it helps us sound more polished and precise. When you're speaking or writing, choosing the right verb phrase can make your message clearer. Remember, put off is a common way to express delay, but using alternatives like postpone, delay, or hold off on can add variety and professionalism. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding these substitutes helps us communicate more effectively in both formal and informal situations, especially in professional settings where clarity is key. Give, your singing is beautiful. Don't stop it now. Remember, when you're performing or practicing, it's important to keep going and not give up. Sometimes we might feel unsure or want to quit, but perseverance is key. Keep singing, keep improving, and trust in your talent. By continuing to push forward, you'll develop even more confidence and skill. So always encourage yourself to keep going. Your voice has so much potential. So on this slide, we're looking at the phrase put up with, which means to tolerate or endure something, often something unpleasant or annoying. Sometimes, instead of just saying put up with, we can use a couple of other verbs or phrases that mean the same thing, like tolerate or bear with. For example, in the sentence here, I can't tolerate the noise in my street. It's becoming too much, and I feel I'll have to move because I simply can't endure it any longer. This concept is important because, in everyday conversations, we often want to express how much we can or cannot handle certain situations. Understanding these synonyms and how to replace, put up with, helps us communicate more naturally and precisely. Remember, the key idea is that put up with is about enduring something, and sometimes, depending on the context, you might choose a slightly different word or phrase to make your speech more varied and expressive. I have never really gotten along with my brother. We are always fighting, and it's been that way for a long time. Sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, we just can't see eye to eye. It's interesting to note that when we talk about getting along, it often involves a couple of key phrases like get along or get on well. These phrases are about having a good relationship, especially with family and close friends. It's important to remember that relationships can be complicated, but with effort, they can also improve. So even if we're struggling now, understanding these expressions helps us talk about our relationships more clearly and find ways to strengthen them over time. Let's take a look at some common phrasal verbs that you might find in your student's book on page 20. First, we have turn it off. This is often used when talking about switching off devices like lights or computers. It's a simple way to say to deactivate or stop something from working. Next is threw them away, which refers to discarding or getting rid of things that are no longer needed or wanted. It's a common phrase when talking about cleaning up or decluttering. Moving on, cut it off usually means to detach or sever something, like cutting off a piece of rope or stopping a supply, such as cutting off water or electricity. Then we have took it back, which is about returning something to its original place or to the person who gave it to you, like returning a borrowed item. Lastly, filled it out refers to completing a form or document by entering the necessary information. These phrases are very useful because they help us describe everyday actions in a clear, natural way. Understanding these will definitely improve your ability to communicate more fluently and accurately in different situations. Let's take a closer look at some common phrasal verbs related to daily life and relationships. First, we have put up with, which means to tolerate or endure something or someone that might be annoying or difficult. For example, you might put up with a noisy neighbor if you value peace and quiet overall. Next is don't get along with, which refers to having a poor relationship or not agreeing well with someone, like classmates or family members. Moving on, give up is about stopping doing something, often because it's too hard or you're no longer interested. It's a common phrase when talking about trying new hobbies or habits. Then there's take up, which means to start a new activity or hobby, like taking up tennis or learning a language. Put off is about delaying or postponing something, such as putting off homework until later. We also see put up with again, emphasizing that sometimes we just have to tolerate certain situations or people. Lastly, throw away refers to discarding something you no longer need or want, like throwing away old clothes or trash. These phrases are very useful because they help us express everyday actions and feelings more naturally. Understanding and using them correctly can really improve your communication and make your speech sound more fluent. Let's look at some practical steps we can take to improve our well-being. First, you could go to a sports club. Getting involved in sports is a great way to stay active and meet new people. Next, you ought to get a nicotine patch if you're trying to quit smoking. It's a helpful tool to manage cravings and support your health goals. Moving on, you'd better give up sweets because reducing sugar intake can really benefit your energy levels and overall health. Instead, you ought to eat more vegetables. They're packed with nutrients and essential for a balanced diet. It's also important to believe in yourself more. You should have more confidence. Trusting your abilities makes a big difference in achieving your goals. And don't forget, you should go out and have fun. Engaging in enjoyable activities keeps your spirits high and reduces stress. Finally, you might volunteer to help others. Giving back not only helps those in need, but also enriches your own life. These small but meaningful changes connect to the overall theme of taking positive steps toward a healthier, happier life. So in this slide, we're looking at some common ways to give advice or make suggestions using had better. For example, we'd better buy a new car suggests that maybe our current car is no longer reliable or efficient, and it's time for an upgrade. Similarly, they'd better go to bed implies that someone might be staying up too late and should get some rest. Then, I'd better take a vacation shows how we can advise ourselves to take a break when we're feeling overwhelmed. Finally, you'd better go home can be a gentle warning or suggestion for someone to leave, perhaps because it's late or they're in danger of overextending themselves. These examples highlight how had better is used to emphasize the urgency or importance of taking action, which ties into our overall theme of making effective suggestions in English. Now, as we wrap up, I want to highlight the importance of the workbook exercise, specifically exercise F on page 278. This activity is designed to reinforce what we've covered today and help you apply these concepts practically. Remember, Consistent practice is key to mastering these skills. The homework associated with this content slide will give you a chance to solidify your understanding and prepare you for the next steps. So I encourage you to complete the exercise thoroughly and thoughtfully. This is a great opportunity to deepen your grasp of the material and ensure you're confident moving forward. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to seeing your progress.